Bombay Dreams, Shweta Bachchan Nanda in conversation with Parvathi Nayar. Shweta Bachchan Nanda is a columnist for DNA and Vogue. A well-known personality, Shweta has her own clothing line, MXS, which launched in 2018. Her first novel, Paradise Towers, was published in 2018. Moderating this session is Parvathi Nayar, who is a multidisciplinary artist with a practice centered on complex drawings. Parvati is also a writer, poet, and commentator on contemporary culture. I request our panelists to please come onto the stage. I request you to take the session forward, ma'am. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and how lovely to have you all here this afternoon. And even lovelier to have the lovely Shweta here in Chennai, who will be talking to us about Paradise Towers, her new book. Now, the art of community living is something that's come up in several books. While it's not a subgenre in itself, right from, say, Emile Zola's Potluck to Manal Suri's Death of Vishnu to many other novels, The Elegance of the Hedgehog. And I suppose there is a certain fun in putting lots of diverse characters together under the same, under the same roof and thinking proximity will allow them to tell their own tale. But I'd like to ask Shweta, what was it about apartment block living that made it the structure of your book?
First of all, thank you for having me here at the Lit Fest. And it's been ages since I've been back in Chennai, but it's always lovely to be here. Brings back a lot of lovely memories from my childhood. So, why an apartment block? I think it's a classic case of the grass is always greener on the other side. Growing up in Bombay, we lived in a bungalow, and it was a very protected existence. And everyone who lived in the buildings, all my friends from school, seemed to be having a lot more fun, a lot more building friends than I did. So it was always aspirational for me to want to live with tons of people and be a part of the hustle and bustle of what living in a multi-story building in Bombay is all about. So that's actually where Paradise Towers came from.
So, I mean, as you've said, you've not lived in this milieu of all these sort of people jostling for space and gossip and interactions. What sort of research did you do? Did you actually go and talk to people? Did you base them on people that you know? How did your characters, the Kapoors and the Modi and the Singhs in this building, how did they come about?
So again, it's about growing up in a city like Bombay, where you are constantly thrown in with people, from different backgrounds, cultures. It's something you just sort of pick up. I was a very shy girl growing up, and for me, it was always nice to sort of sit, either hide behind my mother, or sit in a corner at parties and just observe and see what everyone was doing and pick up on, people's little quirks really interested me and entertained me, and I loved that. And I think that's where all of them come. Of course, some of the characters are, sort of not based on anyone I know, but, inspired by, people I've come across, or a group of people I've come across in my life.
Yes, there's lovely detailing here and there which makes you think, oh, I know that character, he or she reminds me of. But actually, it's not the complete truth to say you've never lived in an apartment. You have, haven't you, in your college days?
In my college days, but that's a very different way of living. My brother and me shared a place off campus, and they were good days, but not as interactive or as colorful as Paradise Towers or a building block in Bombay.
But did you, during sort of student living, did you have to cook and clean and all of that?
Yes, of course.
Was there a division?
I did the cooking, my brother did the cleaning, I did the laundry, he paid the bills.
I think that was an excellent division of labor. And the fact that you did the cooking actually allows me a really nice segue into the reading that I'd like you to do, because I want you to read a passage that concerns food. So shall I?
Okay, now do I start there, or how do I?
No, I can. Can you juggle? I'll give you just a little bit of the background of the passage that she's going to read, where a certain character in the book sort of follows his nose to delectable aromas that are coming and follows his nose to a neighbor's house to try and get something. Let's see what it is that he gets, right? So this is midway through a chapter towards the early part of the book.
Onto one of these sofas sank Mr. Roy, slapping his thighs and then rubbing his knees as if polishing them. Mrs. Patel appeared carrying a tray of steaming hot pakoras and perfect little yellow pillows of dhokla, the sight of which made Mr. Roy rub his knees even more vigorously. She started portioning out the snacks into plates while absent-mindedly helping herself to the pakoras at such a rate that Mr. Roy wondered if there would be enough to go around. Finally, his plate in hand and piled high, Mr. Roy cracked a smile. He dipped his pakoras into the pool of green chutney dabbed onto his plate by Mr. Patel, and biting into it, sat back on the sofa and closed his eyes, losing himself to its taste. Snippets of the Patel's conversation entered Mr. Roy's consciousness, distracting him from the sensory delights his taste buds were shooting up to his brain like bolts of lightning. He was a man in turmoil, an intellectual preferring the company of his books to any person he had ever met, including his irascible wife. Now he was compelled to seek the company of other human beings, especially at mealtime, for he had grown weary of fish. If this fact were known to his wife or members of the rather close-knit Bengali community with which the Roys exclusively socialized, they would accuse him of high treason. And this was why he had taken to appearing on the doorstep of his neighbors around tea time, taking advantage of their hospitality. Satiated and too full for his own dinner, which was soon to follow, these moments of stolen indulgence were the highlight of his day. One wouldn't be exaggerating if one said his life. So little had he to look forward to these days. Soon, the worn-out warbling of green sleeves rang through the flat again. Mr. Patel, expecting the children back from playing in the garden, called for one of the houseboys, who, having returned from his siesta, ran to answer the door. But it was the lean, sari-clad figure of Mrs. Roy that came into the Patel sitting room instead, having much the same effect on the group as that of a cloud obscuring the sun. After greeting her neighbors and stating the purpose of her visit, she was in search of her husband, she stood silently, staring daggers at her spouse, who, oblivious to her presence, continued to fill his plate and mouth, only stopping to praise Mrs. Patel's cooking, lamenting the lack of such finesse at his own home.
A round of applause for that, please. As you can imagine, large wars arise from such inauspicious dissing of one's own wife's cooking, but that I'll leave you to read the book and find out. But tell me, Shweta, what is your relationship with food? Through the book, to me, it seems that food is like a true thread which creates moments of suspense, moments of resolution, moments of conflict. Was this unconscious, or do you feel that Indians relate, a lot of Indian emotion can be expressed through food?
Absolutely. Food is a strong influence in all our lives, and especially Indians. It's, I was actually just telling you a story when my children were younger and in school. Every time they got A mark or a star, my mother-in-law and me would take them to South Indian food because they love dosas, and it was a huge treat. So I feel food and celebration is always tied up in our lives. If you pass or if your child passes well, everyone gives laddus or it's the done thing. And I'm a keen I like cooking a lot. I try to cook at least twice a week at home. I cook a lot for my father, which he enjoys eating. And it's something that is a huge part of my life as well. So it's quite unknowingly found its way into my writing.
No, I think that's why it's very organic. I think some of your memories of earlier visits to Chennai center around food as well.
Yes, yes, they do.
Yeah, she was earlier saying how they, when they'd come when your father was shooting
There
here.
was a good 10 years, I think, where my father was doing a lot of films based in and around Chennai. And every time we had holidays, my mother would bring us here. And it was a huge thrill for us because we would get to eat idlis and dosa for breakfast, which normally we don't get to. And in fact, even at home, every Sunday is South Indian food. We love it. So, it was always a treat.
Yeah, I know food, I think, is very evocative of memories and of situations. And I think when you sort of read this, immediately other visual imagery comes to mind. So you've had, I think, very many different food influences, in your life with your, your grandmother was a Sardarni who married a Hindu, and then there's the Bengali side of the other side of the family. But I noticed also that you have your own fashion label, and your fashion's always on point. I think we've all been saying what a wonderful jacket it is. Yes, I think that the stars on the jacket are really gorgeous, aren't they? But interestingly, you don't bring fashion very much into your book. I think off the top of my head, I can just recall one character wearing an orange chiffon sari with dangling earrings at a crucial point in the book. But otherwise, there isn't very much fashion. Is there a reason for that?
I didn't think about it till you just brought it up, and I don't know why. Maybe it's because I was also writing the book while creating, co-designing the line, and I think maybe it's just a case of when you cook, you can't eat,
Yes.
and so when you're designing, maybe you don't want to write about it so much. That could be the only reason. Oh, okay, sorry.
To segue from that into the dedication in the book, which is very beautiful, to both her grandfathers, Dr. Harivansh Rai Bachchan and Tarun Kumar Bhaduri, for their gift of words. I mean, essentially, the art of writing a book is the art of loving words and being a wordsmith. And, you have an amazing ancestry where that's concerned.
Yes,
Do you remember them? Do you remember incidents with them, or how you draw from their writing?
absolutely. We grew up in a joint family, so that meant my grandfather, my Dadaji, Dr. Harivansh Rai Bachchan, lived with us and was actively working on a couple of his books while he was, while we were young. And actually, it's words have always been a part of our lives. So we go back to them every time we need to reflect, or there's a crisis. We always go back to my grandfather's writings. Very often at home, my father will pull out one of his books and read a poem or sing it, because that's the way he heard his father do it. And we'll sit around and listen to him do it. And as children, on our birthdays, my grandfather had 6 grandkids. So every birthday, he would write a poem for each of his grandchildren. That was his gift to us. And they're all with my mother. I wish I could have got something here. But they were little sort of almost childish little rhyming verses, which he would sort of incorporate our names into it and write a poem around that. And it was always very exciting because it was the last gift that was opened. And he would recite it, and you felt very important. So words have always been a part of our lives, so to speak.
That's a lovely memory to cherish and hold, I believe. Yes. When did you decide that words were going to become a more active part of your life? When did you start thinking about the book? And can you take us through that process a little bit?
So, as I said, I was a very shy girl, and early on in life, I got into the habit of writing for myself. So short stories or just filling in a journal. It's just something I did and always maintained. And once my children left and I was in what you call the empty nest, a friend of mine suggested I start writing for a newspaper out of Bombay called DNA. And I wrote 2 sample essays and sent them off, and they liked it, and they said, please write for us. And so every week I had to put something out, and it gave me a lot of confidence because, sometimes, I would get a message saying, I really enjoyed what you wrote, or it resonated with me, and it gave me the confidence. And one fine day I was actually in Delhi at my favorite bookstore, Bari Sons, and Anuj Bari, who's also my agent now, said, when's your book coming out? When are you writing a book? Because he's seen me for years, we discuss books and everything. And I said, actually, I do have 4 chapters written. And he said, well, send it and I'll have a look. So I sent it to him, and that's how Paradise Towers happened.
Oh, that's wonderful. I've read a little quote by Shweta somewhere where she said, of all the art forms my family dabbles in, writing suits me the most. And in a sense, I can see why, but would you like to tell us why, perhaps?
Again, it comes from being shy and a little reticent with the spotlight. And I feel I hide behind my words. So I think it suits me the best.
But they also reveal a lot, Shweta. Once you started writing, who was the first person in your family, perhaps, who read something of the writing? What did they say?
Well, so I have a daughter. She's just turned 21, and she's in college in New York. So I would email her things now and again, but it wasn't anything sort of, active. And the first family member who read my book in entirety when it was just in a manuscript stage was my mother. I gave it to her and I left for the weekend. I was very nervous, and when I came back, she sat me down and we had a chat, and she told me that she was a little surprised with the topic, and she said, how do you know what happens in a building? Where have you seen all this? And I said, all my life, Mama. And she said to me, I found your writing very visual, and I think it reads like a screenplay, and you should maybe one day consider that. And I said, oh gosh, wow. But I was so relieved that she enjoyed the book. So she was the first person who read it and commented on it.
Well, since she herself has said it, do you ever see it sort of become a screenplay, or what's more fashionable now and what's everywhere are TV series? Because a book like this, which is different characters, can also be sort of episodic. Do you see that? Would you like that?
It's I haven't ever thought about it. I mean, I can understand what you're saying when it would lend itself nicely to see a TV show, but I haven't really thought about it. So I don't know. I didn't write it with that in mind. That's just the way the story came.
But if I asked you to pick a favorite character, who would you pick?
I can't. It's, as I say, it's always like choosing between your children. So it's a little difficult, but I really can't.
Do you feel you're being disloyal to them if you pick one over the other?
Yes.
But then let's imagine that this is going into a TV series, and you can cast them any which way you like. Is there a dream casting that you would pick?
My entire family, I'd put them all in it. Easy casting, I wouldn't have to beg anyone.
I want to see this TV series for sure. Apart from the lovely kind of quirky characters that you have, you also sort of bring in a lot about the interiority of the buildings, of the chaos that's there, the smells that are there. And there are also some sort of really interesting, odd details that I sort of quite enjoyed, such as there's a character whom I won't name because that would be giving things away. But when this particular character had lost his job and subsequently his good nature, he had taken to spending his mornings while his wife was out at work at a tea stall in the market near their building. This tea stall was next to a garage that got customers who needed number plates changed overnight or bullet holes covered up in a matter of hours. And as they waited for their repairs to get done, the owner of these vehicles would head to the stall for refreshments. And of course, this character falls in with the bad crowd. But I was very intrigued about a place like this that covers up bullet holes and things like that in Bombay. Did you make this up, or
Yeah.
did you hear this snippet somewhere?
No, I'm sure it happens, but it's my Hindi film influence. So you have to forgive me for that. It's my wild imagination at play.
No, that's what books should be about. But interestingly, you still chose not to set your book in the world of films and in the milieu that you knew. Why was that?
Because I don't actually know it. I don't think you can know the world of films unless you're actively working in it, and I am not. As children, my parents made a concerted effort to keep us out of it. We never had magazines at home. I've said this several times. My father never came home in makeup or costume. And for a very long time, I know this sounds a little silly, but we were quite unaware of what he actually did. You know, when you're working in films, and in those days, they had hectic schedules. They were doing at least 2-3 shifts a day. So very often in the morning before we woke up for breakfast, he was gone, and he came home only when we were fast asleep. So we looked forward to these holidays where he would be working, and we had holidays, and you know, we'd be taken, and not to set, so to speak, but you know, we had time with him when he came back. Bedtime was delayed.
Were they strict parents?
Very.
Are you a strict parent?
Not as strict as they were.
Because I ask that not just out of curiosity, but because you're very sympathetic to the young people in your book. You give them a lot of leeway. You're very sympathetic to them wanting to date, wanting to come back late, to the foibles of young people. Would you say that comes out of being a parent yourself?
Absolutely, and also being a teenager at some point in my life. So I feel we always go on about how, you know, the youth is our future, and you know, they are the world we're going to inhabit, and we don't, in their formative years, their teenage years, we don't give them that space. We don't give them the space to be individuals and think. We sort of want to enforce our views and our opinions on them, and I'm against that. I feel it's tough enough being a teenager. There's so much going on, you know, with school and acceptance and your hormones, and you're just trying to find yourself. And I think we confuse the matter by being sort of strict and draconian and come back at this time and do this. Of course, you want your children to be safe.
Yes.
But I also feel we need to give them that freedom to think, express, and you know, do what they want.
No, that comes through, I think. Which, again, wants me to make you read something that is not from the book, but the more journalistic writing that you do. Yes, the tone of both is light. I mean, but there you're writing from a very, very personal point of view. I mean, it's very light and very humorous. And here, of course, it's made up fiction. So I think the audience would really enjoy just a little article that you read, which I think is very nice.
So this is an article I wrote for DNA, and it's called Thirdwheeling. It was after a trip my mother, my daughter, and myself made to the Maldives for the first time. It was just the three of us. Oh, sorry, can you hear me? Okay, so this is an article I'd written for the DNA, and it was after a trip my mother, my daughter, and myself made to the Maldives for the first time. And it's called Thirdwheeling, which in common youngster speak is to follow or tag along with a couple. Two's company, three's a crowd. In a world fixated on pairs, being the third of anything is, well, awkward. I learnt this lesson firsthand last week when, in an inspired moment of maternal sanguinity, I planned a holiday with my daughter, who in turn invited her grandmother, my indomitable mother, along. Perhaps the sheer terror of being left alone on the Maldivian islands with me and a sketchy network prompted the far more altruistic one, a tri-generational, once-in-a-lifetime trip. We were bags packed and ready to roll in what for this family of long-term planners and hum and hawers was record time. My first taste of things to come was on boarding the flight. The mothership and her Sancho Panza, my daughter, grabbed their seats together, which left me fending for myself on the other side of the aisle. I dug in for the night to the sound of their whispers, wondering what I was missing out on. I consoled myself with the extra handbag and leg space and fell asleep. I won't bore you with the torturous details of connections and flights taken, but destination Maldives was eventually reached. Bags intact, humans almost intact. Now, for someone who had taken the trouble to plan this whole vacay, I got precious little respect. Every afternoon, this grandmother-granddaughter team would toodle off for massages, leaving me to yet again entertain myself. On day one, I worked on my tan, which went a little too well, leaving me just short of burnt to a crisp. Day two, I decided was to be given over to new experiences. Rather optimistically, I signed up for some water activities, namely snorkeling and flyboarding. The snorkeling session was a minor eco-disaster averted. I was perilously close to a rather flamboyant manta ray whose undulating body grazed against mine, eliciting an overreaction of epic proportions from my side and most definitely disturbing the fauna of this well-preserved reef. I was hauled back onto the boat and taken to my flyboarding lesson. Needless to say, that was a non-starter. I emerged from that experience rather red-faced, though not from excess of solar exposure, but pacified that at least no aquatic life was harmed this time around. It was with growing irritation that I sat through the exclusive camaraderie of the well-massaged, relaxed, and glowing duo. Inside jokes on pressure points, muzak, and lengthy discussion of the next day's massage fest were unbearable. I had also worked up quite an appetite, but since everyone else, namely my mother and daughter, had had a snack post-massage and were too full for dinner yet, I had to satiate myself with Haribo gummy bears from the minibar, which my daughter, in a vicious bout of ethnic cleansing, had divested of all the red ones. Incidentally, these are the yummiest. On day 3, I was relegated to group photographer, as the two cohorts preened and posed together while I was left wielding phones and cameras and framing the perfect shot. Any pictures I have of myself on this holiday are selfies with something in the distant background that could or could not be the ocean. By then, I was so sick of third-wheeling, I was almost glad to be getting out of there. Somewhere within Indian airspace on the flight back home, my daughter asks me to come sit by her. I am flushed with importance at being given this distinct honor and happily move seats. I pull out my Kindle as she is opening her book. To my surprise, we are both reading the same one. It makes me happy for some odd reason. We are literally and figuratively on the same page. I look across the aisle at my mother, her head bent over her cherished crossword book, and remember her saying she does them religiously to keep her mind sharp as she ages. Time is a cruel master, I think, and nudge my daughter to go sit with Nani. She's all alone. Lithe-limbed, she extricates herself from a panoply of tchotchke that demarcate her seat and hops over to sit by her delighted grandmother, who grabs her in an embrace as she leans her head on her shoulder and, with the inexhaustible fatigue of the young, shuts her eyes. I look on smiling. Sometimes I think to myself, being a third wheel means you have the best view.
Could we have a round of applause? It's so beautiful.
Thank you.
Which do you like more? I mean, that's so beautiful. I think many three-generational mothers, daughters, and granddaughters, maybe myself included, would sympathize with that, of how grandchildren sort of gravitate so naturally to their grandmothers and find that perfect equation. And it's written with so much heart and empathy. Do you feel that you write differently when you're doing journalistic writing or very personal columns as opposed to fiction writing?
Yes, I do. It's safer to write fiction because you're not digging deep, and I prefer not to write about my personal life because from the family I come from, there's already so much being written all the time.
Yes.
And there's some things you want to keep to yourself, certain memories that you want to cherish just for yourself without having to share it with the world. And so it's far more difficult to write things like these.
Yes.
As I said, it's safer to write fiction because I'm a little detached from it, and it's also from my imagination. But this is something I I have to sort of churn from inside, and very often I'm crying and writing. It's cathartic, but it's not something I enjoy.
But I think the readers enjoy it very much.
They are
Shwetas.
very kind. Thank you.
You've written in your book, among the people that you thank your brother especially. Yes. So I know you talk about the goldfish bowl existence and it's very real. How much a part of that is your brother, and does he help you navigate this process a little?
Absolutely. So there's only 2 years difference between my brother and me, and he was always the more gregarious, social one, and I was always the shyer introvert. And I've lent on him for just about everything in my life. We were in school together, we were in boarding school together, we were in college together, and we are very close. And I don't know how I would have lived my life if it wasn't for him. He is someone who keeps my secrets, I keep his, and I always say when you're living in a fishbowl like we do, it's important to know that there's at least someone else who understands things from your perspective. So if I say something to him, and I may say it to somebody else, they'll say, oh, you're being a little complaining, look at what a lovely life you have. But he'll get it. Yeah. So there's only one other person on this planet who understands me, and that's him, because he's in the same situation as me. My kids won't understand it, my husband won't understand it, my parents probably don't understand it, but he will. So
that's special too, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, do tell him he got a round of applause when you spoke about him.
I shall.
What was his reaction to the book? Was he part of it when you were writing it earlier, or did he just read the finished thing?
He's still reading. He's a lazy reader. And I think they have to read so many scripts on a daily basis. Just, sort of shove a book and say, come on, finish it is a little much. But he was annoying. He kept saying, why aren't you sending me stuff to read? And I kept saying, I'd like to finish it and give you the finished result. And he's championed me in his own way. He's given me a lot of, he gives me a lot of strength and courage. Because he's so outgoing, I learn from him, and he's playful, and he gives me the strength. So if I have to do something and go out somewhere and face people, which is not easy for me, he's always cheering me on and saying, come on, you'll do it, you'll be great at it. And then when I'm done, he'll always check. How did it go? So yes.
What have other reactions to the book been? It's been out for a while now. Have people written in or, let you know what they thought about the book? How has that sat with you?
I'm too nervous to read reviews. I'm very thin-skinned, so I think I'd just be a wreck. And I still have another book to go, so I don't want to just run away and say, no, I can't do this, which is something I can imagine myself doing, but I won't, don't worry. So suddenly HarperCollins is like, what? But it's a very simple, basic story. It's not a mind bender. But the story for me was about describing a group of people from different parts of the country who come together and live together, and it's unique in India because there's so many different people from different backgrounds. I know it's been said that it's stereotyping certain communities, but it isn't. I actually so I come from a family where I have UP relatives, I have my Punjabi Sardar relatives, and then I have my mother's entire Bengali clan, and you do see certain sort of eccentricities that are particular to certain, certain communities, and I love that. I love that about, coming from where I come from. The food, there's a certain approach to life. There's a, the way festivals are celebrated. So I really enjoy that, and which is what I try and put down in my book. So it's not stereotyping people, it's trying to understand and celebrate their individual eccentricities, even if within a group or a collection.
Yeah, no, it's true. We all, with urbanization, more and more of us live in apartment buildings, and I remember when I was young, the apartment building we lived in, we all knew each other, and there was such a celebration of Diwali as it
Yes.
happens in the book. And it was a very communal space, but increasingly that sort of communality is going. Now we sort of, a lot of people who live in apartments say we don't even know our neighbors, we don't know who they are. So it's lovely to read how it could be that, you know, of course there is the negative side of gossip and, you know, a little chit-chatting, but
I mean, that's the fun of living in you know, common space and sharing space with people. It's I find it fascinating. I mean, I love Jane Austen. I love reading her books, and it's all about this. It's about
Yes.
quirks of different people, you know, in a village, you know, in those days in a village, and you know, their interactions, and each of them have a eccentricity or a quirk, and she's such a keen observer of their character, and it's just wonderful to read about people and what makes them tick, and their little idiosyncrasies. So yeah.
yeah, that's what makes them real and
Yes.
makes them human.
Absolutely,
Isn't it?
absolutely.
Other than Jane Austen, then, what else do you read? I noticed in that you sort of were discussing Kindle stories with your daughter. What, you know, do you share ideas of reading?
We do. We do share a lot of. She informs me on stuff that's out, and you know, she's away in the States, and she'll go to a bookshop, and it's funny because she only reads physical books, whereas I'm fine with a Kindle. It's sort of like a reversal of roles. I mean, I would
Yes.
think she would want to be reading on an e-reader. We do share a lot of stories, a lot of books, a lot of recommendations, and she always has a pile of books by her bedside, and so do I. It's something I think I've inherited from my grandmother. From a very young age, she would say, "Read this," and she'd, you know, give me books and encourage me to read. So it's always been a reading household, our house, and a home actually where a lot of stories are being told. When my grandmother, she would, before going to bed at night, Abhishek and me would go to her room to say good night. We'd crawl into bed with her, and she'd tell us stories. And it was the same story every day because we loved those stories.
Oh.
And she would, you know, we would sit there and she would give us a chocolate each, which we weren't supposed to tell my mother because we'd brushed and everything. And she'd give us a piece of chocolate and then she'd run us along. And we looked forward to those, you know, those bedtime stories. And even my mother, while putting us to sleep, would sometimes tell us stories. So it was a house where a lot of stories were being told. My Dadaji would tell us stories from the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, you know, and
Yeah.
that's what we grew up on.
So what's on your bedside now? What books are there?
I am reading a book called Pachinko. It's a Korean author, and also because it's, I don't know if I'll ever make my way there if I ever get an opportunity to. So it's a way to understand a different culture, which is important, and I'm enjoying it. I've just about started it, so.
Oh, excellent. So I understand from the little conversation with HarperCollins and assuring them that you're not giving up writing, that there is another book coming,
Yes, there is.
and
It's fiction.
have you started making notes for it, or have you started writing?
Actually, they have my first chapter,
Okay.
sort of the introduction. I just have to do a little research, which after writing this book, I've realized is something good authors should do. You should go out there and you should research. And then when you have your information is when you should sit down and write it. So I need to do a little research on it and I have to find time. I'll find time.
What is your writing process, though? Do you sort of set aside time every day to read or to write?
I should, but it's like a mad dash. It says, "Oh God, this is my deadline, and I have to deliver 2-3 chapters." So it's like sit down and every day belt it out. Otherwise, months go by and nothing's been written, and then I'll get a message saying, "Hi, where's your chapter?" And I'll say, "Oh yeah, I'm writing it, and I haven't written it." And then I run onto my laptop and sit down and write it. But there's no process. I write better at night because I'm a night person. It's easier for me to write and do things at night than I'm not a morning person at all.
No, I think we are all sort of come from a country of, you know, storytellers and like stories and like tales. And I think that's one of our strongest assets of being Indian. And think you celebrate that very well, Shweta.
That's very kind of you to say. Thank you.
Now, I think that there's, with such a large audience, if there are people who are dying to ask questions, I think this is the time. Do try and keep your questions short because, so we can give more people a chance and, we can give Shweta more time to answer these questions. I think there's a lady in a purple sari in front who would like to ask.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Sarva Mangala.
Nice to
I
meet you.
start with the two questions, very light questions. Start with the light question first. What do you think why we came here to see you? Because you are Bachchan, Nanda or Shweta?
Well, I would hope it's because of me, but I think it's a mix of both things.
50% because you are Bachchan. Another
Absolutely.
50, these days you are on ramp and you are in news. The second question, you told you are very close to your brother. Why did you give your book to your mom than your brother?
My brother was away filming and he's a very lazy reader. He wouldn't have read it and I needed some feedback from some family member and my mother actually would tell me the honest, she would be most honest even if it's blunt. My brother would have cushioned it. So when I want a real critique, I will go to my mother always. Thank you. My dad, again, was very busy reading, but he's making his way through the book. Actually, no, which is why I would never ask him. If, I was saying I cook for him very often, and even, so very often something's made, and my cook says, just please can you tell your father that you've made it, and he'll eat it very well, and that does happen, and I never believed, something he's difficult about. They say, but Papa ko bol dijiye, aapne banaya. So I said, okay. So he's that kind of father, very indulgent.
For those at the back, the question that was asked was why did she give the book to her father? And if you could talk into the mic, all questions, and people at the back can hear as well. There's a gentleman in a pink shirt who's been wanting to ask a question.
Good afternoon, Shweta.
Good afternoon.
I just want to ask you, you had a culture of Punjabis from your dad's side and from mother's side and from the other side, Bengali culture. How did you enjoy Amitabh Bachchan acting in Piku?
I enjoyed it thoroughly. It was a very emotional movie for me because it dealt with a father-daughter relationship. Ours is nothing like Piku's was with her father. I don't shout at him that much. And he's a very indulgent father. But I thought he portrayed the character brilliantly. And it's also because he spent time in his early years working in Calcutta. So he got the nuances from, from his time there of how to portray a typical Bengali old man.
Thank you, Shweta. Another question. Years back I saw an interview of yours, either it was with Simi Garewal or somebody else with Amitabh around. And if you were a little critical about his keeping that asthma, that thing in various places. Yes. How's your relationship with him? I'm sure it is very good, but at times, daughter, father, I am also a father of a daughter. It is, sometime goody-goody and sometime, May I ask you this little personal question?
Absolutely. It's not, I don't nag him unless his food is getting cold and I have to say, please eat. He's so busy and he needs to take time out for himself. But it's a wonderful relationship. We dote on each other. No, his asthma is still there.
There's a lady in the... What? There are a lady in the orange sari at the back first.
Can I ask
Yes.
now?
Hello?
Hi.
Okay. You want me to give it to her first? You can.
Okay, please go ahead.
Okay, yeah. I think I'm an author myself and I love humor. But unfortunately, there are very few people who have this talent to write humorous articles. So I really appreciate your third wheel.
Thank you.
And I think humor comes naturally to you. So how much of humor is there in your book?
Actually, humor for me is it's very important. You know, I make friends with people who make me laugh. I'm drawn to people who make me laugh. I like to always look at the lighter side of life or any situation, and I feel it's always helped me along, even in tough times. And I would like to think that my book is humorous, but not intentionally so. It just finds its way. It just, you know, the way things evolve sometimes can be funny, I would say.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The lady at the back who stood up.
Yeah. Sorry, this is not pertaining to the book much as I would like to have it. But then, since you were talking about your brother-sister relationship,
Yes.
and I would like to know, as a interest in psychology, does it? Do you still bond as much
Absolutely.
after marriage? And
Absolutely.
it's the same.
It's the same.
Yeah.
Once a week, we sit down together and we talk about things, and that will never change. Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The gentleman in black who had wanted. Could you ask your question and then you could pass the mic to
Hi,
him?
ma'am. So while writing your book, did you feel the pressure to fulfill the expectations and preconceptions that were upon you and your surname? At any point, did you think that anyone would bring up nepotism?
Of course, that's something that's always expected. But I didn't feel the pressure because I don't think I could live up to the expectations of the works of my grandfathers, both of them. So it wasn't something I was attempting to achieve. And I'm not in the profession of my father, so that doesn't count. But no, I didn't feel the pressure.
Hello, ma'am.
Excuse me, after the gentleman in black, the lady in white.
Ms. Nanda,
Yes.
mine is not a question, actually.
Okay.
I just want to remind you of something. We stayed together in the Savoy Hotel years ago,
Ah, okay.
and almost a month. And we exchanged, whenever we passed each other in the gardens or something, we'd exchange a word or two. You and your brother were always together.
Yes.
And your wonderful grandparents were there, marvelous people, both of them. And also your uncle Ajitab and his family were there.
Ah, okay.
And the Kapoors, Shashi and Jennifer were there with their daughter Sajna. You won't remember, but I do, because the year was 1980.
Oh, I must have been tiny at that time.
Yes, both of you were very small. I don't know who was the older, but you're always together.
That's such a lovely memory. It's nice to have these
Yes, it
memories
is,
of
it
people.
is.
I mean, I myself have one where, you know, my artwork was part of your father's 70th birthday show, and, you know, Shweta so generously sought me out after the show and said, I really liked your painting. And I thought that was such a generous act,
But
Shweta.
I
That
did.
was lovely.
Thank you.
The lady at the back?
Hi, ma'am. So I want to know, I was an extrovert and I've become an introvert, and my brother was an introvert and he's become an extrovert. So you being an introvert, you've chosen writing as a way to express your feelings. Do you have any other directions, like what else do you do, you know, as your pastime? And do you have any ritual, like how do you write on the computer, or you write or
So
with a pen?
interesting you say this, because I feel my brother now tells me that I've become too social and he's become antisocial. So I think it's the opposite of you and your brother. I do write on my laptop, but if I ever have writer's block, I sit down with a pen and paper and I actually write on that, and then I manage to transfer it on. And that, I feel that helps, just physically holding a pen and writing.
Anytime you can just start?
Usually at night when, you know, things are silent and I'm not disturbed. I think usually that's my process, if there is any. It's rather haphazard, my process. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody.
Hello.
Thank you.
I had a question. You were talking about how your daughter reads.
Yes.
And I'm of a similar age, but I noticed that my nephew and kids his age, 6 or 7, they don't have the habit of reading. And I myself am losing it. So how would you say you get people to read again? Because it's a lovely experience to read, and most of us are losing it.
So my son also isn't a reader. And generally, I think it's because you haven't found the right book. I don't think there's any such thing as not a reader. So with my son, I realized he enjoyed biographies. And those were the kind of books I recommended and sent to him. And he read them fast and wanted more. So I think it's about finding the right book. Also, I feel audiobooks are a good start. For people who don't maybe want to sit and, sort of physically go through the book, audiobooks is a really good option.
Thank you.
Just one more question, and then we've run out of time, I'm afraid.
Hello, Shweta. I'm Malini.
Hi.
Given your background and your flair for writing, would you like to write for films, or would you like your writings to be filmed? Have you thought about that?
I actually haven't. It's something my mother suggested to me. And when your mother tells you something, you should listen to what she says, because she always knows better. My mother tells me that all the time. It would, I don't know if I would be good enough, or if I've developed my craft to that level where it could be a screenplay, but why not? When I build up the courage, maybe someday. Thank you.
Can we take one more? Yeah. There's, just one last question then, the lady who's raising her. So if we could have one quick, short last question, that would be fine.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You read your article also, so I would like to ask about that.
Sure.
So when you're reporting something that has happened with your family members, is it always a frank report, or do you feel the need to add imagined version? Because like you said, you and your daughter reading the same book. Like, I often wonder when I read articles, did this really happen, or did they add it?
No.
How does it happen?
In my column, it's actually the real deal. This is how it was. I don't feel the need to add. Again, as in Paradise Towers, I think there's so much material in just daily lives and the ordinary, daily lives and people. There's so many interesting things. You just have to observe it and notice it and pick it up, but it's all there. So I don't feel the need to embellish anything or add stuff on. Thank you.
Well, thank you. You've all been a wonderful audience, and thank you, Shweta, for being such a generous respondent to questions and on being on stage. The lady in the purple sari said she'd come because you were Bachchan and Nanda and a fashionista, but I suspect all these people and others will come the next time just because it's Shweta.
That's very kind of you to say. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. It was a great session. It was amazing having you here. She'll be signing the books near the Higginbotham store downstairs. If you want to get your book signed, you can meet her there.